Florence Ballard, the soulful singer, was one-third of Motown's biggest act, the Supremes. During the 1960s, this girl group broke records and smashed stereotypes, and Ballard made it all possible.
Florence is one who brought the group together in the first place, so she started the legend.
They were superstars. They were everywhere. Every time you turned the television on, you saw them.
I would stand in front of the mic, and Florence would stand back because her voice was that powerful.
Florence Ballard was barely out of her teens when her career as the Supreme took flight, but it wasn't long before this songbird got her wings clipped. On this episode of Mysteries and Scandals, we'll examine how this siren was pushed into the background, stage right.
When the marquee had been changed to Diana Ross and the Supremes, she did know it was coming. They had told her, but she just was not emotionally ready to handle it.
We'll also reveal how taking on Hitsville, USA, led to Splitsville with the Supremes.
I think that Florence was aggressive in complaining, but I think at a certain point she realized that the machinery of Motown was much bigger than any protest she could put together.
And we'll explore Ballard's sequin fall from grace.
She kind of internalized it, and she started taking it out on herself, and she started drinking.
Florence was hurt. You know, she felt like her life had been taken from her, and she had hard times. I mean, I've been with her when she had tantrums and throw records.
At one point in the early 70s, she was forced to sign up for aid to dependent children.
Florence Ballard, to me, was the epitome of the best of what show business has to offer, and her story was also the worst of what show business has to offer.
I'm A.J. Benza. Join me as we share reflections of a Supreme that used to be, Florence Ballard. Florence Ballard was a hometown girl who'd done good. She was a Supreme. And when the folks in Detroit, Michigan showed up to see Florence in February of 1976, it wasn't to hear her sing. They came to say goodbye. Fellow Supreme Mary Wilson.
Detroit came out. I mean, Detroit was always good for the Supremes. They loved their girls. The funeral was an outpouring of love for Florence.
Maxine Powell is the former arts development director at Motown Records.
People were everywhere. Florence would have loved that. She wanted to be loved.
Celebrity biographer Mark Bigo.
People poured past her casket at the funeral home all hours of the day and night. I don't think people realized outside of Detroit how beloved Florence actually was.
Too bad it took Ballard's untimely death at the age of 32 to get her name back in the national headlines. You see, by 1976, Florence had become the forgotten Supreme. Florence Glenda Ballard was born June 30th, 1943 to Jesse and Lurley Ballard. She was the 8th of 13 kids who grew up in the Detroit housing projects. Raymond Gibson is Florence Ballard's cousin.
Florence was just a nice girl that lived around the corner that wanted to sing. She just knew she could make it. She said, just a matter of time, we'll make it, and she did it.
Florence was nicknamed Blonde because of her light complexion and auburn hair. The pretty girl began performing at an early age.
I met Florence Ballard in elementary school. We were both in the 8th grade. They had a talent show at the school, and I went up there and I sang, "I'm Not a Juvenile Delinquent." And after me, she sang this song, right? And so everybody in the gymnasium was like, wow, because she had this huge, rich voice.
When Florence was 15 years old, she got her first shot at stardom. Randall Wilson is the author of The Supremes, Florence Ballard Forever Faithful.
Florence is one who brought the group together in the first place, so she started the legend. She started the group.
Florence ran up to me on the playground. Mary, guess what? This guy named came over. He wants to start a group. His name is Milton Jenkins, and he manages this group, the Primes, and my sister is dating one of the Primes, and so they got me in the group. He had rehearsal tomorrow, and that's how the Primettes were formed.
The girls soon added 2 other Primettes to the act, Betty McGowan and a skinny kid named Diana Ross. They played mostly school dances around Detroit, with Florence usually on lead vocals. By 1960, the Primettes were confident that it was time to make a record. They eventually scored an audition with Motown boss Berry Gordy.
Barry originally told them that they'd have to come back and finish high school. He didn't want to take on any young kids.
I remember what Florence said when Barry Gordy turned us down. She said, they say he's supposed to know so much. He don't know too much if he don't know how good we are, you know. But that was the real Florence.
Undaunted, the quartet figured they'd find another label. Betty McGlown dropped out to get married and was replaced by Barbara Martin. And then without a word, Florence just disappeared.
An entire month went by that we didn't hear from Florence. And that was, not even a day would go by that we didn't talk to each other, you know. So, we would call the house, or we'd try to go over there, and it was almost like the doors were locked, no one would take the call. Finally, Florence did call us. I remember sitting there listening to Florence give us the details.
Florence told her friends that after a dance one evening, she accepted a ride home from a neighborhood acquaintance who raped her at knife point.
Just even seeing her, she was a different person. It was as if someone had just taken all of her insides out, and everything that we've spoken about, her humor, her sassiness, all that was gone. And I don't think I ever saw it again.
Down but not out, Florence ID'd her attacker and won a conviction in court. Still, Ballard remained focused on her dream.
We went back to Motown, and we literally made them take us, by being there. We're outside the door, then we're on the steps, and then we're inside. And they needed hand claps one day, and we said, we'll do it. And we were in.
They were like the mascots at Motown. They were those little girls that always hang out on the front steps.
Barry Gordy signed the talented singers to a recording contract. There was just one hitch. The name of the group had to go. So the girls polled friends and family to help come up with a new moniker.
Florence was the only one that when the time came for us to sign the contract, brought in her list of names that she had collected all over the place, all over Detroit. I think we should be called the Supremes. And so that's how we got the name.
Playing the name game paid off. The Supremes became the most successful girl group in Motown history. Straight ahead, the hits start rolling, tensions build, and Florence Ballard begins to unravel.
The E! True Hollywood Story every night at 9.
In January 1961, Florence Ballard, along with her friends Mary Wilson, Barbara Martin, and what's her name? Diana Ross, became Motown's first ever girl group, the Supremes. The quartet clearly had the right name, they just needed to find the right sound.
When they went to Motown, they were all sharing lead. I believe Florence was considered to be sort of the lead of the group, not necessarily lead singer. But when they got taken on to Motown through the contracts, it was made clear to them that Diana would become the lead singer.
Barry needed someone a little more commercial. Florence was more jazzy, bluesy voice.
Motown music historian Rick Bush.
The idea to make Diana Ross the lead singer of the Supremes was just a simple business decision. She had a kittenish, Eartha Kitt kind of sound. At first, Mary Wilson and Florence Ballard went along with this plan. They wanted the success. They had gone so far with this that there was no turning back.
Well, I had a couple conversations with Florence about it, and I could tell that she was hurt because she felt it was her group. But she told me, as long as we're making the same kind of money, it's fine with Diana singing. And apparently that worked for quite some time.
The initial contract called for the four girls to split a measly 3% of any profits after recording and promotional expenses were deducted.
The way the Supremes accounts were handled through Motown is something that is still questionable. They were splitting a royalty. A portion of it would be held in a trust for the Supremes, a joint trust, Motown being the other trustee.
Motown actually handled everything. They handled our monies, which we didn't make any money in the beginning. They were our accountants, they were our business managers, they paid our bills, they handled the taxes. We felt we were getting a good deal.
Barbara Martin left the Supremes in 1961 to start a family. Motown decided to keep the group a trio. The girls now split their earnings three ways. Of course, that's only if they earned anything.
They were called the No-Hit Supremes. They went from 1961 to late 63, which was really almost 3 solid years without a record that went any further than the immediate Detroit area.
While the Supremes tried again and again for their first big hit, Florence lent her time and talent to other up-and-comers. Gladys Horton of the Marvelettes.
I met Florence basically the day we were recording Please Mr. Postman. And she asked Brian and Robert Bateman, could she have a moment with me to try to help me along with the song.
Fellow Marvelette Catherine Schaffner.
That was just Florence's nature to be assistant, you know, and helping out wherever she could, giving you tips of things perhaps that you were just not aware of.
She didn't have to do that. She could have said, well, oh yeah, they got a hit song, but I'm not going to help them make it any better. We don't have one.
The Supremes finally got one, a hit song that is, in 1964. Where Did Our Love Go was solid gold and soared to #1 in the pop charts.
After Where Did Our Love Go, it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in a row. So between August of 1964 and August of 1965, they were in the top 10 and at #1 consecutively. Only the Beatles outdid that.
Florence Ballard fan club president Alan White.
The Beatles and the Supremes. And they were superstars, just massive success. And they were everywhere. Every time you turned the television on, you saw them.
What's that old expression? Be careful what you wish for? Well, Florence, Mary, and Diana were now full-fledged stars. They're not all equipped to handle their sudden fame. When we come back, Florence Ballard is pushed to the back of the group and then pushed out. In the summer of 1964, Florence Ballard, Mary Wilson, and Diana Ross went from being the no-hit Supremes to right into the top of the charts. But instead of crooning Where Did Our Love Go, the girls were wondering, where did our lives go?
They were touring constantly. When they were not touring, they were in the recording studios, doing interviews, doing television shows. It was a non-stop thing. They had no time for vacations.
At the height of the Supremes' fame, about 1965, 66, 67, it began to wear on all three of them, and I think that the way they dealt with the pressures was very different. Diana loved it. Mary loved being a star, and Florence is the one that I think grew leery of all the excitement and all the attention and never having any time to herself.
I always, from that point on, looked at Florence. I always kind of was checking, and she was never as happy as Diane or I.
Florence was afraid to fly, and they were flying a lot. And she was tired. I mean, I remember there were times where they would have one day off where Mary and Diana would maybe stay where they were to go to the next gig. Florence would fly home. She missed her family.
Florence also missed being in front and singing a song her way.
The Supremes started out as a real group where they each shared leads, different songs. Within the course of only a few months, Diana Ross had everything. She had the hit record, she had all the numbers in the show. Florence was given one solo.
She did the song People from Funny Girl and just loved that song and always got a thunderous applause whenever she finished the song. When that song was taken away from her right before a show at the Copacabana and where she was told that Diane would now be singing at the show, I think that this really broke Florence's heart, and this became the beginning of the rift between the Supremes.
Florence loved Diane, Diane loved Florence. We were great friends. But that little thing, I believe, started eating away at Florence much more than it did to me.
One thing about Florence, if it's something she did not like, she would let you know.
The frictions began to get really bad because, in addition to the success being all geared on Diana's voice, also Diana began a relationship with the founder of the company, which was Berry Gordy Jr.
The folks at Motown began toying with the idea of renaming the group Diana Ross and the Supremes, with Florence and Mary singing backup.
She didn't want to be used in that manner. She still wanted things to be a group, so that they could all be heard, they could all be equally successful, and they could all come out of the group with solo careers.
I think that Florence was aggressive in complaining about her treatment within the Supremes, but I think at a certain point she realized that the machinery of Motown was much bigger than any protest she could put together.
She wasn't as spunky as before. She kind of internalized it, and she started taking it out on herself, and she started drinking.
Angry and dejected, Florence began to miss rehearsals and to show up late at scheduled appearances. Motown made it clear to Ballard that she could be easily replaced. The singer was slowly nearing the end of her rope.
I used to tell Florence, if you just hold on, then it'll be, we know Diane's going. It's already been said in the papers that she's going to be leaving. So if we stick together, be strong. But Florence never really had that kind of patience. It was just extremely frustrating, and I think that was when, you know, she just said, forget it. That was the Florence Ballard way. They're going to have to put me out then, and if I do this, then they're going to put me out. But that was a sad thing to see.
In 1967, Berry Gordy called a meeting with Florence, her mom, and the other Supremes. Ballard was told to shape up or ship out. She agreed to clean up her act, a promise she failed to keep.
In Vegas in June of '67, when the marquee had been changed to Diana Ross and the Supremes. She did know it was coming, but she just was not emotionally ready.
Ballard lost it. For the first time, she appeared drunk on stage. Her wig was askew and she looked a mess. That night, Berry Gordy put Flo on a plane to Detroit and called in a permanent replacement. Florence Ballard was no longer a Supreme. Up next, the failed comeback and a final sour note. In the summer of 1967, 24-year-old Florence Ballard was booted out of the Supremes for drinking and disorderly conduct. Florence was pretty sore about being fired, but decided to strike out on her own. The problem was, Ballard needed to get out of her contract with Motown.
By this time, Motown was a conglomerate, and it was Florence and it was Motown. And this was a situation, David and Goliath, where David didn't even have a slingshot.
Still, Ballard managed to reach a settlement. Despite a string of spectacular #1 hits, Florence walked away from Motown with only $160,000 in cash and a few stocks and bonds. Talk about a bum deal. Ballard didn't even get any song royalties, and she was no longer allowed to associate herself with the group that made her a star.
Everyone knew that she'd just left the Supremes. It seemed like when she signed with ABC Records that she really was on her way to something.
Ballard married boyfriend Tommy Chapman, a Motown chauffeur, in 1968 and proceeded to build her solo career.
She was really excited about it. She went to New York to record. Tommy was going to be her manager, but I don't think Tommy was actually equipped to be her manager.
Florence released her first solo single, but it tanked. ABC Records had a tough time marketing the former Supreme.
She couldn't capitalize on any of her past 8 years of work because it was all tied up with Motown. So they pretty much lost interest in promoting her as an artist after that.
The solo career seemed like it was over before it started.
Florence was hurt. You know, she felt like her life had been taken from her. I've been with her when she had tantrums and throw records and say, I can't listen to this. I did this for 9 years, and where did it get me?
Ballard did get one thing she wanted, a family. In 1968, she gave birth to twin girls and had another daughter 4 years later. But after Florence and Tommy split in 1972, the singer was alone and broke.
At one point in the early '70s, she was forced to sign up for aid to dependent children. And she was now getting $135 every 2 weeks.
Florence fell into a deep depression and continued to drink. In 1975, a concerned friend alerted the Detroit Free Press to Ballard's desperate situation. After years of not working, Ballard's phone started to ring again.
So what happened was that she started making a few appearances. She went on a local talk show in Detroit. And then in June of '75, there was a concert in Detroit, and Florence was contacted to be on the show. And it was really like a homecoming for her. I think that evening was when she really wanted to, get her career going again.
For the first time in years, Florence's future looked bright. Mary Wilson and Diana Ross offered to help Ballard get back on her feet. But in February 1976, Florence suddenly fell ill.
She did report that she had been feeling short of breath for a couple of weeks, and sort of hot for maybe a week or two before. And then on a Saturday, she collapsed at home.
She had been on different medications, most notably high blood pressure. In my conversations with Tommy Chapman, he said that he was at the hospital and they said she was stable and that he could go home.
Early Sunday morning, she reportedly suffered cardiac arrest and died. And that was February 22nd, 1976.
Fans around the world were stunned. Florence was only 32.
It was a funeral unlike any other I've seen. There was a commotion at the back of the church when Diana Ross had arrived. People actually booed Diana's appearance at the church. They really blamed her for what had happened.
It was a very dramatic, tragic thing. Diana was hurt, everyone was hurt. It was something no one expected.
It's widely been accepted that Florence Ballard died drunk, slovenly, on welfare rolls. That was not the case. She was trying to make a comeback, And she never wanted to stand in Diana Ross, Mary Wilson, or anyone else's way. She just wanted to get on with her own life. That's where the tragedy was. She was just in the midst of doing it, and she died.
The best way to remember her is just remember her, period.
She was a poor girl from a big family who always dreamed of being a singer. She found a group, she created a group, she named a group, and they became the Supremes.
Florence Ballard's legacy is a little difficult for me to really kind of define. The only thing I could say is that when those people listened to the records, that girl was pouring out her soul and every one of those oohs and those ahs, you know, and she was an unsung hero, an unsung hero.
Florence Ballard's dream, her music, keeps ringing in our ears. Hey, Florence, we still hear a symphony. I'm A.J. Benza. Join me the next time we take a stroll down the flip side of the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
Now, a lot of the pattern that we had in our shows, Florence did that off the cuff, and they became part of the show. Like, there was a line that Diane used to say, well, thin is in. And so Florence said, honey, thin may be in, but fat's where it's at. And so they kept that in the show.